Welcome back, Richard. It's good to see you this morning.
Good morning. Everything's okay over there, I
Every,
assume?
everything is going well, and the our topic of conversation today is going to be very timely, um, almost as though we planned it that way. But
A
we are
little
going to
bit.
talk about summer because especially here in our area, school is out in the next within the next week or so. Students are going to be out of school, and it's going to be summertime.
Right. We're nearing the end of another school year, as unbelievable as that sounds. It always seems like we were just talking about the holidays, and here we are at the end of another school year.
Right?
And that introduces the concept, the idea of something called summer slide,
Yes.
also known as summer learning loss. And this is an article that addresses this topic especially in teenagers,
Right.
because teenagers pose a special challenge, I think, for summer slide because they're, in many cases, especially kids who are around 11 or 12, that middle school age child, they're too old. Many times they're too old for summer camps
Right.
and babysitters, but they're too young to go to work and
Mhm.
to be left on their own. So this is about teenagers, young teenagers, middle teenagers, older teenagers less so. So what we want to do is how to avoid, the title of this article is How to Avoid Teen Learning Loss, but also mental health risks in the summer. And what piqued our interest here was there's not only a learning loss that can occur in the summer, but there are also increased mental health risks that occur for teenagers during the summer.
Absolutely. And I think, and this is fascinating because we've been doing the podcast now for a long time.
Mhm.
And, there were a number of years where we wrote a weekly column in our local newspaper.
Right.
They've kind of done away with all of the
Mhm.
columnists in our
Yeah,
paper.
there are no columns anymore.
But every year we wrote about the summer slide, and we every
Right.
year we talked about some of those difficulties that are associated with this span of time, this roughly 2 months, where students are they are released from school, released
Mhm.
the hounds, they're out of school. And
Right.
they're not really doing much academics, and they come back in August, and they've lost skills, and there was some research out that talks about, losing up to 2 grade levels in reading um, during those 2 months. If they're not reading regularly during those 2 months, they can lose up to 2 years of on their reading test. And first off, that's crazy to think about.
Mhm.
But the research was pretty consistent with that. And then we really had a great conversation about it, around the time of COVID, because during COVID, they weren't out just for the summer. But if you remember in the spring of 2020, they went from March until August before starting back at school, for the most part. School was very inconsistent for the rest of that school year. So that was much more time. And so this idea of a summer slide of academic learning loss has been around for a long time. We've talked about it for a long time, but there's some information that came from this article that adds to it and adds to some of those concerns that we've talked about for years.
That's right. I'm glad you make that point about the COVID shutdown because we know that within a 2 month span, kids can lose at least a month of learning skills. Um, and it's during the pandemic, it was, you're right, just about 6 months. But even when school began again in the fall of 2020, it was a very disjointed,
Right.
disrupted school year with masks and social distancing and kids being sent out of school for a week and then back in school, and the teacher was out, and we had substitutes. So if we lose time just in 2 months, imagine the devastation, and it did. It created a lot of upheaval and a lot of learning loss, which has never been regained, by the way. I mean, kids who lost skills, like kids in first grade who lost a year of reading instruction, they're still not, they're still having a hard time catching up.
Mhm.
So what happens in the summer is you have the absence of structured educational activities.
Mhm.
When you're in a school building, you're getting instruction. You're just hearing it and experiencing it. There's a possibility that math suffers more than reading,
Mhm.
but we have to be careful because there's probably a loss in music and art and
Right.
PE too, but we measure math and reading. Okay, so
Right.
we're more aware of the math, the losses in math and reading.
Well,
Um,
and I think it's really important that this article focuses on teenagers because, when you think about math, you know,
right.
think about algebra. You if you don't study and you're not practicing algebra, or if you miss a couple of days of algebra instruction, you're going to be behind and you're going to be missing things because everything keeps building on itself. And so you go a couple of months without thinking about
Mhm.
algebra. And then you
Right.
go into the next math that's going to be building on those algebraic principles. It can be tough.
Right. Reading is reading. It doesn't matter whether you're reading a picture book in first grade or you're reading a biology textbook in 12th grade. The reading process is the same. Math is different. Math, you have to learn a new skill. If you remember, algebra is a new endeavor for kids. Algebra 1, it's the first time you've ever had this stuff, okay? It's the first time you've been exposed to it. And if you're not practicing it, if you're not exposed to it, you're going to forget more easily.
Right.
So with Algebra 1, plane geometry, and Algebra 2, these are all new skills, and you have to keep working with them. As soon as you stop, you begin to experience learning loss.
Right.
Okay. It can be 2 months or 6 months, you're going to experience learning loss. So we're concerned about this 2 month period in the summer, and we're concerned especially for teenagers because they're the ones who are getting exposed to new classes. Okay. These are new courses for them, whether it's math, science, social studies, doesn't matter. It's all new. And if they just stop doing it, there's gonna be a loss.
Right. Absolutely. So when we think about the effects of summer and how it relates to learning loss, you're
Mhm.
right. We start seeing achievement gaps, and they especially for students who are already a little bit behind,
That's
that gap gets even bigger over
right.
the summer if they're not practicing, and it does that loss accumulates over time, it's
Right.
sort of here we are talking math principles, but it's almost exponential in the way that it loses. It's not a steady loss. It's like the loss broadens faster the more the time that passes. I was talking to a family the other day, and the student hadn't been doing a lot of academic work, and they started let's start doing some stuff every day, and we've been working to try to get that established. And she's going to be going into middle school and couldn't remember how to do the basic principles of simple subtraction.
Right.
Like,
Borrowing,
she
carrying. Right.
was having a hard time remembering that, and that's something that she had been doing for years.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
because she hasn't been actively engaged in some of that for a little bit now, she couldn't remember how to do that and had to relearn it.
Right. And so you have loss occurs in two ways. One is there's something called the achievement gap where certain kids are behind. So school ends on May 29th, but there are kids who are 2 or 3 months behind on May 29th. Now
Right,
you add summer loss to that,
right,
another month or two, and you're starting school the next year, maybe 4, 5, 6 months behind your classmates. All right. So the achievement gap widens. And also, if you're behind, the achievement gap, if you're losing 2 months every summer, that the accumulation of that loss, it accumulates over time.
right,
So going into second grade, going into third grade, going into fourth grade, so there's an accumulation of loss over time if nobody's addressing it. Okay. That's learning. But there's a second issue here, and those are the mental health effects. And we typically don't think about those as much as we think about the learning loss.
absolutely. And so I hate that we always go back to, or I feel like I always keep re-mentioning COVID. But one of the big things that we learned during COVID is the influence and really significant effect that being separated from our friends and
And that's
social
right.
groups, the negative influence that it has on our functioning. And it significantly increases anxiety and depression and affects our self-esteem and all of that kind of stuff. And so when you then look at the summer, and for those of us that are a little bit older, when we were in school, we went to school, everybody in our neighborhood went to the same school. And
Yeah.
so typically speaking, everybody in our neighborhood knew each other because we all went to the same school, we were all in the same classes and all that kind of stuff. Now, the way that schools are functioning, one kid in the neighborhood may go to a completely different school, or all of the kids in the neighborhood may go to different schools, and so they don't really know each other
Right.
anymore. And so during those summer months, that anxiety and depression and loneliness significantly increases because if they're just staying home and they
Right.
don't have connections with anybody else and they don't know anybody in their neighborhood, they don't have those connections to sort of combat those feelings of anxiety and depression.
Right. And that's part of the problem is that when you're out of that social setting, and many kids, they go into suburban neighborhoods where there are no kids.
Right.
Okay. So you're alone, you're in your bedroom, you're playing video games because there are no kids around. You're too young to drive.
Hmm.
Your parents may not be able to, if they're working, they can't take you to your friend's house. So you lose that social interaction, and that exacerbates depression and anxiety. So if you're prone to those things anyway, it gets exacerbated in the summer because now you're alone. Okay,
Right.
you don't have access. You don't have in-person access. You can still do it over the internet. But the other thing is, in the summertime, many preteens, what we call tweeners, and
Mhm.
young teenagers have no purpose.
Right.
And when you don't have a purpose, you just kind of, if there's no reason to get up, you don't have a job to go to, you don't have school to go to. If there's no reason to get out of bed, many kids just stay in bed, either sleeping or vegging out or
Right.
being on their phone. There's no reason to get out of bed, so they stay in bed.
Richard, you know, it's so funny because we have patients that come in, especially preteens and teens, um, and when they're homeschooled, and this isn't a knock on homeschool or anything like that, but
Right. Hmm.
you know, they come in their pajamas. They come to sessions in our office in wearing pajamas.
Because they're coming from school.
And there is something to be said about getting up. And again, we've talked about this before, but there's something to be said about the importance
Mhm.
of getting up and having somewhere to go, getting
Right.
getting dressed, having
Mhm.
a morning routine that gets you prepared for the day. If you stay
Right.
in pajamas all day, you're going to function as though you're in pajamas all day.
That's right. If you're not getting dressed, you're going to be in that sort of mode
Yeah,
the whole day. There's that wonderful thing about first make your bed,
yeah,
and it's true. You have to get up and get going. That means getting dressed. I had a student come in the other day in pajamas, and I said, "Are you coming?" And she said, "No, I'm coming from school," and she had bedroom slippers and pajama bottoms on. Okay.
mhm,
So in the summertime, this all gets exaggerated. Also, many kids neglect self-care.
right,
If they're going to school, they tend to take a shower and clean up a little bit. If there's no place to go, there's no reason to take a shower. I don't brush my teeth. We don't take care of ourselves. Okay. Many kids have all day video game. There's nothing else to do. So they play video games all day and you get brain rot, doom scrolling and video games. And if that's all you're doing, that can lead to mental health issues. We
right.
talk about isolation and loneliness, the effects of boredom. Some kids are just incredibly bored. There's nothing to do. They're glad to be out of school,
Right.
but they don't replace it with anything.
Right. And again, we're talking a lot of what we're talking about here are like those middle school kids who are
Right.
too old to go to summer camps and
Right. Hmm.
daycares, but they're also too young to be able to go out on their own and drive and,
And just be on their own, playing in playgrounds and going.
right. So the parents are working,
Right.
and so the kids tend to be home alone.
Right, right. So too much time alone. Then the other thing for middle teenagers and older teenagers, dangerous behaviors are more likely. They're out doing things, and especially, these are the peak months of drug and alcohol use. I mean,
Right.
they use more of this in this because there's time, because there are parties, because they have free time. And so these are the peak months of drug and alcohol use and more dangerous behaviors, swimming, going out and doing things, riding vehicles, golf carts and bicycles and electric vehicles. And so there's an increase in more dangerous behaviors. And so you risk physical injury.
Right.
Okay.
So
So,
think about what parents can do,
right. Right.
because
So what can you do about all this?
right. And it's admittedly, it's not easy because again, we just set the stage with saying that, your parents are probably working and
Mhm.
the kid is home alone. And so, what can you do? Well, the first thing I think is you have to encourage some academic engagement.
Right.
And kids hate it when you mention that. Believe me, they're going to they're going to oppose. They may do so verbally, they may do so with eye rolls, they may do so with heavy sighs, but they're going to react probably in somewhat of a negative way.
Right.
However, the importance of it is, immeasurable, but there's some ways maybe to do it without making it such a, we're not talking about sitting down for 3 or 4 hours a day
Right.
to
Right.
do math and reading. We're not talking about that. We're just talking about spending some time every
Mhm.
day doing practicing some of those skills.
Right.
And you got to encourage reading as the first example. You have to, whether that's we're all going to sit down, in the
Mhm.
evening and read for 30 minutes.
Right.
We're going to go to the library together and pick out a few books and do that once a week so that we have something to read in the evenings. But maybe most importantly, talk about what they're reading.
Right.
They're
Mhm.
engaged in some conversation about it.
Right. Yeah, because as you look forward to the summer, if you have school-age children, you're looking into this summertime block, this 2 month period. Divide it into two things. Think about it in two columns. One is, what do I do about learning loss? Then the second column is, what do I do about mental health? How do I keep them engaged and active and not let them get isolated? And the first thing to do, the easiest one, is to encourage reading,
Right.
because that's something that you can encourage just by reading, by setting the example.
Right.
If your children see you reading, it's more likely that they're going to read. If they never see you pick up a book, it's less likely that they're going to. So first, set an example. As you said, go to the library, get engaged in their reading, talk to them about their reading.
Mhm.
Okay, what are they reading and what are you learning and all that sort of thing. The second thing you can do, and this is both for learning and mental health, is support their interests.
Right.
If they're interested in gardening, if they're interested in needlepoint, if they're interested in, we have a kid who's interested in, he crochets, I think.
Mhm.
Um, you know, take him to a store, get them the supplies that he needs, get engaged, get involved in their lives, and support these interests because you want them to pursue their interests,
Right.
whether it's a sport like golf or tennis or whatever, art, music, whatever it is. Support their interests, get them the materials that they need so that they can be fully engaged in these activities in the summertime.
Absolutely. And I think that, we talk about reading a lot
Mhm.
and you can incorporate reading with their interests and things.
Right,
Do the same thing with math.
right,
They again they need to be practicing those skills. And
right,
even if it's not, you don't have to write out algebraic equations for them to fill out every day. But
right,
if you ask them questions like, okay, well, we need three of those and it costs this much. How much, what do we need to buy? How much money do we need to pay for it? And,
right,
you can engage them that way. And yeah, parents, I know that that sounds silly and it may sound, uncomfortable to even mention or anything, but if you get into the habit of doing it,
Right.
it becomes a very interesting, and you can really see how your kid thinks about things. I love doing that here in the office with
Right.
students.
Mhm.
They'll mention buying something. I'll say, well, how many of those did you buy? And I'll say, well, we bought, three of them. I was like, well, so how much did that cost? Would that have
Right.
cost altogether? Just to see how they think about math.
Right.
Um, because if they're thinking about math, then it keeps those skills fresh.
I like getting young baseball players. I think kids who are 10,
Yeah,
11 years old, and I'll say, "Oh, what's your batting average?" Well, I don't know. I
yeah,
don't know. They don't even know. They don't know what it is, and they wouldn't have any idea how to calculate it. There was a wonderful story on the other day on the radio. This girl was visiting. She was visiting friends, and she got really involved with their family, and so she spent a lot of time there. And the dad during dinner would give them math problems, and he would say, "Okay, you got a plane leaving Washington at 9 o'clock. You got another plane leaving. When will they pass each other?" And they're doing this mental. We all hated those problems, right? Because we could
yeah.
never figure out how to solve them. And he would ask these kids, and they'd be sitting there doing these math problems while they're having dinner. And it was a wonderfully entertaining story. But I thought, and you know who else was there was a physicist um, who was very good at that, who would just sit and talk to his kids about
Right.
topics in science. And what a wonderful way to begin to interact with your kids,
Absolutely. And I
It's a
think,
20% sale. How much are you saving?
right,
20% off. How much is that?
right. And I think that you can weave educational things, academic things into your everyday,
You're
whether
there
it's
for
play,
right.
your
Mhm.
lifestyle, all that kind of stuff. And it doesn't take a lot of work really ahead of time to do that. You can, good grief, you can search the internet and come up with all kinds of those types of questions about, a plane leaving one place and another place. But you tie that stuff in and you make games out of it. Over the summer, start having a trivia night. Uh,
Right. Hmm.
Visit museums and historical sites and things like that, just to keep them engaged in this learning process. You can't just go to, theme parks uh,
Right.
every weekend. Adding in some of these other things encourages and fosters that ongoing learning process, and that's really the main goal there is learning that process.
Right.
We have right
And
around here, we live in this what they call the Highlands area of
right.
Lakeland and Central Florida here. And so the elevation here is a little bit higher than most other, Florida's pretty
It's
flat.
5 feet.
Yeah, it's,
Mhm.
it's a little bit higher, but but because of that, we can find all kinds of different fossils and all kinds of different, like here in the center of Florida, in the middle of Florida, there's seashells. If you dig down in the ground, there's a little site right around the corner here, right down the street here, that where you can go and you dig and you find seashells and stuff, and it's like, why are there seashells here when we're 60 miles from the ocean? And you can, and
Right.
hey, look that up and see if you can find out why there's seashells here, or shark's teeth, that you can find shark's teeth here in the middle of Florida, and have them learning that through that process.
Right. If you take a trip, let's say you take a vacation week, you go somewhere for a week. Well, what are the historic things? What are the other things that are going on there? If you come to Disney, if you come to Florida, people go to the theme parks, but there are also a lot of natural places where you can see snakes and alligators and you can learn some other things. So build some learning activities. They don't have to be odious. They don't have to be imposed on kids, but just expose them. You take a few hours to visit an alligator farm,
Right.
or you go see we have an area here near Sarasota where they have elephants in the wild, and you can go down and look at the elephants. Or there's a place in Gainesville that has wild horses. So there are other things that you can do, and
Mhm.
you can weave those experiences into the fun times that you're having, and just put that into your travel plans. Also, get them outdoors.
Right.
Oh my God. It doesn't matter where you live. I know that it's getting hot, but you live in Florida, so you learn how to deal with the heat. If you're out in the heat, you get used to the heat.
Yeah.
If you stay in a 72-degree house all day, 95 is going to seem very hot. But
Right.
if you're playing outside, it's less of a problem. Okay.
Just make sure you bring water.
Right. Drink lots of water. You'll be okay. Scrolling, being on your phone and scrolling through YouTube and TikTok and Google and video games, we know that there's a relationship between excessive electronic use and depression and anxiety and boredom and loneliness. Okay. So be careful. Get kids out doing other things. That's the best antidote for electronic overuse.
Absolutely. And going along with that, I think that one of the things that we again talk with a lot of young teens about is
Mhm.
volunteering,
Volunteer. Yeah.
getting that gets them out of the house. There's oftentimes there's lots of places around where kids can
Right.
volunteer, even if it's just, a few hours a week, just getting
Mhm.
them out of the house, that helps to improve, we know from research that helps improve their mental health. It improves their interpersonal, interactions, social skills,
Mhm.
and it gives them a purpose. We mentioned earlier that when you don't have anything to do, you start to lose a sense of purpose and what am I doing? And you get bored and all that kind of stuff. And so, if your kid is volunteering a couple of hours a week at the SPCA or
Mhm.
at a museum, something like that,
Right.
makes a big difference in their life.
That's right. Yeah, get out and do something. And I think that's the important message here is that if you want to reduce the mental health risks
Mhm.
that summer brings, volunteering is a good way to do it. And you can start volunteering. You can volunteer. Kids can volunteer to help neighbors, do things. I mean, it doesn't have to be
Absolutely.
an agency, but there are agencies. Kids need to have service hours.
Right.
Kids need to be doing other things. So volunteering is a good way to manage these. And you're also learning when you volunteer at a place, you're learning other either professional skills or personal skills that you can use. If parents are working, if you have two parents working and you need coverage, there are summer programs,
Right.
but you need to investigate early.
Mhm.
Um, Find out what exists in your community. There are plenty of resources. Find out what programs are good and what is a good match with your children.
Right.
If both parents are working outside the home, it may be necessary to rely on summer programs, especially for younger children.
Right.
With the older kids, even young teenagers, 12, 13, 14, you can leave them at home alone, but they have to be occupied with something.
Right.
So, what this takes we talk mainly about teenagers. What this takes is planning this is intentional parenting. And we're
Right.
going to talk about intentional parenting in another podcast uh, later this week. It takes planning and it takes a little bit of thinking.
Right.
We spend a lot of time planning vacations. Okay, we're going to be gone for a week and we're going to go here, 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 and here. Put this into your vacation. Spend as much time
Right.
planning this as you do planning your vacation. Okay. Put this stuff into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there are lots of ways, sometimes very creative ways, sometimes very basic ways, to make sure that kids accomplish things. Those kids that you're leaving home while you're at work. There are lots of ways to ensure that they accomplish the things that you want them to accomplish prior
Right.
to having that free time, so they don't spend the entire day on their devices or plugged into their video games and stuff. And so
Right.
yeah, we'll certainly be talking more about some of those things. But
Yeah. And before, you talk about the pandemic. What we learned is you're battling electronics. You're battling this overuse of electronics. And the best antidote for that is to get them to do other things. Don't tell them that they can't do the electronics. Tell them that they need to do, we are going to do these other things. And
right,
doing the other things is the best antidote for electronic overuse.
right, yeah, it's far easier to get a kid to say, you do this first and then you can play your video games. It's
Right.
far easier get them to do that than it is to say, you're not playing video games.
Right.
Now do this.
Right.
Kids are going
That's
to
right.
be much
That's right.
more opposed to that approach. So
Yeah. As a parent, you need to be giving them the other alternatives. Don't just say you can't do this. Say we're going to do these things and we'll have fun doing them together.
right,
Mhm.
absolutely. All
Yeah.
right, well, that is it for today. There's a link in the show notes to the article that we were referencing for this this podcast. But so check it out, and think about and start planning for that summer, and because it's coming soon, next few weeks. It'll
Weeks
be
away, right?
all
Hmm.
right. So until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.